making time for us this morning. Now, Mr. Kambura Milton is a global peace ambassador, and I mean, who could better articulate to us some of the issues at stake when we are having a discussion about this? And again, I do encourage you to go and be part of our discussion. You could do this virtually. Get onto our Twitter hashtag UBCGMU, and of course our WhatsApp platform is 0709-602-592. Looking at the Sudan conflict, now why is there fighting and what is at stake for the region, the neighboring countries? Well, we'll be getting into all of this. Now, we know, just for a brief background, intense clashes between Sudan's military and the country's main paramilitary force came in just mid last month. Now, of course, looking at the aftermath, we know that progress has been delayed. We have seen a couple of people flee. We had our very own Ugandans who were brought back in the country not so long ago, but we know that hundreds of people and very many things and property and infrastructure have all been distracted or destroyed because of this. And of course, we know that things are not yet okay because we're still seeing lots of issues happening down there. But just to get into it, Milton, when you look at this, what do you feel, especially, how do you feel about all of this happening in South Sudan and the implications it could generally have on a country like South Sudan, even before we extend it to the neighboring countries in the region?
Sudan right now is facing a very complex, fragile political, military, socio-economic situation that needs humanitarian support and response, and the collateral damage that the war has caused is 1 million people already displaced in neighboring countries, including South Sudan. But very important is that the Red Cross is reporting over 600 people dead. This is very bad, and there should be an intentional response at regional level. East African Community, IGAD has already put up an infrastructure to deal with the situation. Already Saudi Arabia is leading another parallel peace negotiation, but also Egypt. So to me, I feel, my sister, we have lessons to learn. But before I dive into that, as we proceed, I want to thank His Excellency, the President of Uganda, His Excellency General Yoweri Museveni, and his government for really rescuing the Ugandans out of Khartoum, which is really right now very hot, with bombardments of bombs and even illegal technologies according to the Geneva Convention. So there is a lot of indiscipline in this war because the conflict from both sides and the way the war is going, the battlefield engagement and the apparatus and the tools being used, some of them are illegal based, and they are against the Geneva Convention. So we see children are being killed, pregnant women being killed, hospitals bombarded. So nothing is entering, nothing is getting out.
Yes.
So it's a very bad situation, my sister. And the Ugandans, you have something to learn, definitely, with all these years of stability, in terms of having repelled all rebel groups from the country. We want Uganda to be like this and to lead all African countries in pursuing the pacification of deepening shared values and principles for peace.
Okay. Now, as we're looking at power struggles, what kind of picture does this create, especially when it comes to the leadership styles that we have taken on as African countries?
Of course, you are aware that the conflict in Sudan is between two bulls. I'll call them bulls.
Indeed.
But they are not really cows. But I'm trying to depict that the two generals, General Fatah, who's the leader of the Sudanese armed forces, and the one who has been leading I will call it a standby government.
Yes.
Because elections, he was talking about preparing the country for the election, so that the political parties can go into a presidential campaign, a civilian government.
Yes.
Then his colleague who helped him actually to overthrow the former president, you are aware about that story, who had just been put in jail
Yes.
to serve his term for abuse of human rights and all that kinds of things. That is General, is called General Dagalo. General Dagalo, you are aware, he was the one leading the Janjaweed. That's a rebel cluster of Sudan during that time when they were fighting. So they integrated forces to overthrow the previous regime. But Dagalo demanded that before elections come in, they should have integrated the two armies of the two generals, which somehow General Fatah refused, or he was delaying, so that it tactfully may be something to do with much of his army controlling the government or controlling the army. So somehow this conflict has now has caused a catastrophic humanitarian situation.
Yes.
And so I feel when it comes to the question of leadership, Africa is still having poor leadership that does not compromise, that does not respect win-win solution to conflict. A leadership that is military is no longer needed at the top of the helm of governance, rather to serve the interests and the defense of the people, just like the way it is in Uganda.
Yes.
Uganda People's Defense Forces. Actually, I like the former, he was called Mayombo. He was a lieutenant, something like that.
Yes,
the one who advised the president not to call our army armed, you know, he said, Uganda People's Defense Forces. Indeed, this is our forces. They are using our taxes, the taxes you and me pay. So somehow they should be there to serve the interests of the people, not to be there also competing for being a president. Yes, you can retire like the way the Constitution of Uganda stipulates it, that you need to retire from the army and stand for presidency,
yes,
and never to be a public servant. That's a good perimeter. It gives guarantees for national stability and peace. But now in Sudan, the generals are fighting to lead and own the country as personal properties.
Yes.
That's where it begins, selfishness. And so such a kind of leadership style cannot sustain and cannot bridge peace, cannot bring stability, cannot bring even economic stability, because peace is the foundation for economic stability. So right now as we speak, you must be aware that more than 15 hospitals down. So
yes,
people are dying, no medicine.
I mean, the UN the other day came out to warn, and they were worried for different categories of people. They were looking at patients, they were looking at pregnant women, they were looking at mothers being specific vulnerable groups that were bound to really suffer some of the hard consequences if this conflict or if this war really stretched. And this caused some sort of worry and panic, even especially amongst the people or the countries outside South Sudan. So clearly it creates a whole picture of what you are trying to depict.
And I think we were there, our team has responded. We are aware IGAD is doing something. His Excellency Kir, we have Ambassador Daf Ali Arhaj from Sudan, who has visited Khartoum and Juba rather, and they had a bilateral meeting talking about peace negotiation, South Sudan to
yes,
actually play a part. But also His Excellency Ruto visited the South Sudan, but also looking at how he can go to Khartoum in the next few weeks. His Excellency the President of Uganda is supposed to break the ice by leading a Pan-African kind of contingence,
yes,
to really build what we call African Union peace action roadmap for Sudan. But now Uganda should lead by example. Right now we should be, I will use this platform to request Foreign Affairs and all our ministries and also Cabinet and the Parliament to put resources together and be able to respond through donating food, medicine. We are supposed to actually send the Doctors Without Borders so that they go treat the women, the children, our elderly, the people with disabilities, so that Uganda, other than depending on Saudi Arabia, is a far neighbor. We should somehow respond. The neighboring countries should respond.
The immediate
yes. Because no water, no medicine. We are looking at food. There is already Sudan had an issue to do with 3.7 displaced people in Sudan, internally displaced. So already it's like adding fuel to an already burning fire. So we are talking about a country that has suffered decades of instabilities. You are aware. Now malnutrition levels, Sudan is one of the top 5 countries suffering from child malnutrition globally. Now it has trickled to 15 million people already suffering as a result of this damage. So the collateral is high, the cost to pay is high, but very importantly is that Uganda must lead as an example, just like the way we did in Somalia, the way we did in South Sudan, the way we did in Rwanda. Right now, His Excellency the President, using the national broadcaster, must champion the peace negotiations immediately, because somehow, if we just say the Arab League should move with the tripartite treaties that are going on, that probably may be signed next week. This is not sustainable. This is not just a religious context. No. As much as they are doing something, the African Union must jump in by using the continental framework, because Sudan is part of Africa. And so we should not look at them that, okay, they are Arabs, they are Muslims, then we should just keep our eyes deaf, our ears the other side. No, they are part of African context. So the African Union, the IGAD, East African Community, COMESA, all of us must champion the peace framework and dialogue, force these two generals to ceasefire. That is point number one.
Now, Milton, I do, and again, we appreciate that there is a lot that can be done and contributed by these other neighboring countries. But circling back to what you did talk about, depicting the kind of selfishness that we are seeing amongst these two bulls, like we want to call them this morning, you also did talk about the involvement of military. And I would just really want to hear from you. Is there a possibility where we can have the military not heavily involved in politics? I'm not saying maybe. Is there a possibility that that can happen? And does it really mean anything? And also looking at how politics, especially in this region, have been they've been characterized by lots of conflict. Even the neighboring countries, when you look at Chad, when you look at Ethiopia, when you look at South Sudan itself, all these have been heavily influenced and, heavily influenced by political conflict. Does this say something again about the type of leadership that we have chosen to take? Maybe you could start off with the military involvement. When you look at most of the African countries, really, the coups that we have seen in several, there was a time where coups were happening in almost a certain region of Africa. Yeah, we had the military heavily involved in all these. So what do you have to say about that?
You know, history teaches us a lot. But somehow because of greed, my sister, selfishness, and I think poisonous, people get poisoned for power. They want to be in power, but they forget that power comes from the local people. Yes. It's the local people.
It's granted unto you. Exactly. You don't get to run away. So
somehow I am very perplexed and disappointed in the 21st century, where African leaders still believe in the power of dominancy in power systems using the gun. Today, than ever before, we must realize that social cohesion, to be achieved, the gun must be put aside. We must make sure the gun is not part of the table, on top of the table, when we are talking about stability of nations. We rather say guns are good for national defense.
But how do we do that?
Now, the way we do it is, first of all, putting constitutionalism. The fact that you have a weak constitution, because the constitution represents the inspirations of the people. The inspirations of the people, for example, of Africa, they are tired of conflict, of wars. And then how do you help them really fulfill their dreams? Is by making sure that we silence the guns. The guns can be used to defend the continent of Africa against external aggression. If China came to attack us here, then the guns can come out. But at what degree do you also bring guns on the table? Is when dialogue has failed. Is when kind of ambassadors like me are no more there. It means when interfaith systems are no longer there. The religious leaders may be... So it means guns are not means to peace building. They can never sustain, because all these are generals.
Yes.
You can imagine. And each one of them has appetite for power. So we have learned something, that the last 600 years, we must put guns aside and focus on developing mechanisms where me and you can discuss the future of our countries, where me and you can do business together, where each one of us can build parliaments that work for the interests of the people, where each one of us, regardless of our political parties, religious differences, gender differences, we have reached a time where Africa, to achieve the integration vision, guns must be silenced. And how do we achieve that? One, we must pursue constitutionalism and rule of law. Two, human rights, we must respect them. But then we must actually understand that human rights and human responsibility are intrinsically linked together.
Yes.
That people demanding human rights alone will not work for Africa. Take responsibility to care for your neighbor. Pay your taxes so that government may facilitate now public services. Then there you will have your public, your human resource.
The issue will come up if they actually don't use the taxes as they should, because if the citizens are doing the right thing as they should, paying their taxes, of course accountability comes up and it's not adding up. Now, where is the problem there?
That's what happened in Sudan. When you have corrupt leaders in offices, leaders that misuse the military, leaders that do not listen to the voices, the alternative voices from the people, that's what happens in Sudan. And so Ugandans, you must pay attention to what we call little things.
Yes.
Like when you see a minister stealing iron sheets, it is an indicator that something is wrong.
Yes.
When you see a bodyguard, a military bodyguard, shooting his boss, a minister, there is something wrong. These are small indicators. Where you see fertile soils, a very good climate like Uganda, fresh water, everything is beautiful, but people still complain of hunger and poverty. That means a lot to leadership. Now, leadership is a huge sector, it's a huge subject.
Yes.
But it requires you not to be angry. Like there are some people who are going to be angry.
You have to be very objective.
Exactly.
While at it. Yes.
Exactly.
And level-headed.
Exactly. So when I say, why is Africa still poor when we have the most precious minerals in the world? It's because of these conflicts. Someone wants to be in power so that his tribe is rich than the other tribe. That's nonsense. That's not leadership. Now, leaders in Africa lack the most important gift of leadership. One of which is living for the greater good of others. Living for greater good of Africa. In the next 100 years, what does Africa need to do to achieve A, B, C, D? Can I be able to leave maybe Mr. X to be at the top because he represents all our interests? But now in Uganda and other countries in Africa, everyone pulls each other down.
Yes.
Ministers cannot talk to each other. MPs, now it goes down even in the neighborhood. Each person makes sure he or she constructs a tall wall. He's tired of looking at the next neighbor because he has another tribe. He is a different tribe. So some of these issues bulk they increase and the anger of the local people increase. Remember, what caused the disruption in Sudan was just bread, my sister. The cost of bread, not just huge issues, just bread. A certain woman started this one, say, enough is enough.
Yes.
Why is the price of bread increasing from 100 to 150?
Yes.
The local woman started and launched the revolution that caused the overthrow of the previous regime. Now the civilians who are supposed to now process and go into elections, it is the generals who jumped on the table because they have the guns.
Yes.
And say, you civilians, get out of the table. Now we are the generals. Now you people prepare your elections, while for us we are leading the country. Are you seeing how you can misuse?
Yes.
And I'm seeing it in Uganda, boiling pole, slowly. But I advise this nation, Uganda, that the generals must go to the barracks and leave politics to us, the local people. You have a lot of work to do. Leave politics to the politicians. That is what I can tell you, because when you see generals now coming on table to now conduct certain things that you see, that is what will happen even after the we are still lucky that the President Museveni is also a general. Somehow maybe they fear him. But I'm telling you, some have started actually kind of failing to listen to him. Including actually, I don't know, but this is a big statement. I feel General Mohoz should also use this opportunity to learn from us, the ambassadors, to see that before you come out in your military attire to call for presidential interest, first retire. Because it could culminate to something different by actually attracting other fellow generals on the table. Okay. So this message goes to the General MK, but also to the CDF in line with His Excellencies. I know His Excellency understands these matters.
Now, Milton, getting back, there are three aspects I would really love for us to understand when it comes to the concept of a constitutionalism, especially modern day constitutionalism, and you look at also democracy and also look at human rights. Do you believe that each one of these is an integral part of the other, or is there a possibility of maybe working with constitutionalism without democracy, or do they contribute towards each other? And again, these three combined, human rights, modern day constitutionalism and democracy, do you think that as African countries we appreciate the value of these three concepts in our day-to-day lives, in our politics, in our leadership? Do you believe that this is something that we have come to understand, or we are still on the learning curve as African countries and nations?
You know, when it comes to these two important concepts, people become angry when you talk about them.
but I mean, we still have to talk about them. If we consider ourselves democratic countries, democratic states, definitely we need to get into the insights of democracy. And democracy without constitutionalism, does it work or does it not work? Do we have to talk about human rights while at it or not?
First and foremost, human rights are not given by any government. You don't need to beg Museveni, say, please give me my human rights. Oh, then no. Human rights are God-given. They are intrinsic. They are we were created with them. It is God who gave them to us. The role of any leader in the world is to make sure he protects them. She protects them. These are intrinsic. They are a part of our creation. And they are our guiding compass for us to be able to relate and be able to develop this world. So when I'm talking about human rights, I'm talking about something bigger than anybody, bigger than even a nation, bigger than the whole world. We are talking about God himself creating a human person or a human being in his own image. And say we have created, what's your name, Mama?
Philomena.
That name is beautiful.
Thank you.
Philomena. Philomena, God created you. And say, nobody should kill you, because that person killing you has no power over your life. It's only God. But then you see someone killing Mr. Ichuli. You remember the 2 weeks ago we lost Mr. Ichuli?
Yes.
You know, someone killing Honorable Colonel Ngola, the bodyguard. The policeman killed a business entrepreneur. That is last week. Last week was a bad week.
Very bad week.
No one has right You don't have a right to kill another. It is only God who can actually it is actually taking that someone back to heaven. So there is a government and all of you, the military forces and every civilian, military, anybody, you don't have a right to actually get your gun and shoot a neighbor, a friend. Even enemies, you don't have a right to kill even your enemy. You go to court, put your case clear, and the court will judge.
You don't have the right to take anybody's life.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we have rights of association. Why are African governments blocking people from associating, from speaking their mind? Whether I speak something in favor of your interests or not, I have a right to speak my conscience. You have a right to have a family. You have a right to get married to anybody, anywhere in the part of the world. You have a right to own a property. So when I'm talking about those things, it's not His Excellency the President and his NRM government that guarantees them and say, we will give for you, we will donate, we will. No, their role is to actually protect them. To protect, making sure every Ugandan achieves, enjoys living in those rights as enshrined by the Constitution. And our Constitution is good, my sister. They are there that the President of Uganda will protect those human rights. But somehow, those bad people, bad elements are also in everywhere.
I mean, they have to be there in society.
Even in heaven, they were there. Even Satan had to tell God, shut up. Then God chased him.
Yes.
So everywhere. So we pray that really everyone listening to this debate is that what's happening in South Sudan, is actually a violation of human rights. And the consequence is that you must pay for abusing human rights. So you talked about good governance, democracy. All these are now the fruits you get when people are able to give chance to everybody to enjoy human rights. Peace is part of it. So you cannot talk about democracy when there is human rights abuse.
Yes. And again, speaking about Sudan, we know that the warring parties made a peace deal, at least to alleviate the civilians out of the suffering, but little progress has also been made towards that. So when you talk about human rights, clearly it shows that these are not being really exactly respected, especially there in South Sudan. Well, we're talking about the Sudan conflict and the collateral damage and the call for peace. Why is it necessary? What is at stake in the country itself, but also extending outside the country? All of that between me and here, our peace ambassador this morning, Melton, taking us through it. Well, getting back to that discussion, what is at stake, especially for the neighboring countries, now that we have seen what is really happening in the country, how people are losing their lives, infrastructure development is really going down. There is now progress there is no progress that we can register. The economic, social welfare of people is wanting. But now when it comes to the neighboring countries, what is at stake?
My sister, what is at stake right now is we have Central African Republic, Chad, we have, of course, Egypt, even South Sudan, even Uganda.
Yes.
The neighbors are the ones receiving the refugees. But I must say that more than 70% of the people are stuck in Khartoum right now as we speak. So those that have been able to, run have been able to be received by those governments. And I'm very happy. I congratulate those leaders of those respective countries for taking a Pan-African spirit to host fellow Africans safe and give them food, shelter, wherever in those parts of the continent. So I must say what is at stake is that those governments must use their finances. So you didn't plan for it, my sister. Like this government, we usually have disaster preparedness, whatever.
Yes.
So I know what is at stake is that those governments are constrained. As you know, African countries, economically, we are still, struggling. So that is one. Then two, what is at stake is that each of those countries, they are putting voices together. The African Union, those which are part of IGAD are putting voices together, and they are pushing for a Sudan peace talk deal. that is going to bring General Fatah and General Dangalo together to make sure each one of them call for ceasefire and put weapons down. Then from there they can now discuss the bigger dream of Sudan. What is the bigger dream of Sudan? Immediate ceasefire, immediate preparation for elections so that the civilian government can be set up to give chance for political parties. You know, this is their business. It's not the business of generals.
Yes.
No. And I think, Mr. President, I hope you will get this message. Please help the country. Because we have had, you know, more than 70 years of experience of instability. It is only just this small time. We don't want to go back. Put your generals in order. You find a Ugandan general is a corrupt general. He's involved in those things, you know. He's the one doing those things, as you know. Put your generals in order so that we don't experience again what is in Sudan. Kenya is in the same message. Rwanda, the same message. Tanzania is in the same message. And in conclusion, probably with this subject, is that Global Peace Foundation, which I lead in my country, we have 51 chapters all over the world. I'm just from South Korea, meeting government leaders. We had the Global Peace Leadership Conference hosted by India government and the people of India. I was in the United States meeting several leaders there. We went to Sudan. Right now, we are planning to now go to DRC on our second trip. What are we talking about? Next year, we are planning to have the Global Peace Leadership Conference 2023, calling all African leaders. And Middle East, Europe, America, South America, all of them, like the way His Excellency hosted in Munyonyo in 2018. We want to make sure that in the context of African integration, what are those things that we must immediately start investing in to end conflict, to make sure we have one educational curriculum, for example, to start integrating our children, to produce children who can work in any part of Africa. That is what we call integration. You're talking about integrated market. Who's going to be in that market when they are not educated, is equipped with skills that match with the demands of the 21st century? So what about your boo-boo? You are talking about boo-boo, buy Uganda, build Uganda. How will it work when your import capacity is more than 70%? You need to tune now and focus on the education to make sure children, this 70% percent of the Uganda's population, is able to produce products into the market. Then that's when you can achieve boo-boo. But when you are talking about agriculture,
there are certain things you need to consider before they are building factors to the big ultimate goal.
Exactly. Okay. So those are some of the things we want to discuss next year. And my colleague, Honorable Amondi, Daniel, in Kenya, you are listening. You told me you will be watching it right in Nairobi. And the government of Kenya, really we need to support this idea that His Excellency Ruto, we thus should host all heads of state in Africa. Next year, we will communicate later, but we want to make sure all African heads of state sign a declaration. Committing that no more borders. We want Africa to be a continent of open borders. One passport, one currency. We are talking about the dream for a unified Africa.
I mean, some of those things we have tried to achieve when you talk about one currency, one passport and all of that, but I feel like sometimes even as African countries or East African countries, we have self-sabotaged. Why could that be?
Because of the bad elements. When you bring bad elements on the table, for example, you bring leaders at the top there who don't understand the concept of living for the sake of others. For them, they want to take everything. You hear that.
One of the biggest worries here is that most of these East African countries, they have fear or phobia, I don't know how, for lack of a better word, of having a central unit of power for a state, for a whole country, or to be reporting to a central source of power. Is that something that these East African countries can actually go with? Can they flow with this kind of trend?
We must, now this is, the young people should lead that revolutionary mind change. mind change game. It is a war almost.
So that the old ones, let's agree, this is not something they
because
can
now
really...
the young people constitute the biggest population. In the next 10 years or 30 years, it is us who are going to be in those seats as heads of state. So somehow we should be able to have improved mindset, better than our elders. Say, okay, enough is enough. Why can't we give up this appetite of being, you know, head of state? Every small continent, very poor GDP, poverty, disease. When we are united, we have a bigger market, big economy, big infrastructures. We can facilitate very good education, healthcare system, and maybe you can become a governor, a governor of Uganda, maybe governor of South Africa. But it is all one government led by you, one head of state, or a king if you want to go back to your kingdoms, maybe King Zulu. So it's all about it. This is, by the way, this is a big subject, my sister. And it is what our people in the villages, in the local population, as the civilians want.
Yes.
We want to make sure Africa can also talk about something. We have the gold, but we are still exporting gold in raw form. What type of continent is this? And diamonds, you can imagine, we have very fertile soils for agriculture. Can you imagine? We can actually feed the rest of the world for 100 years. Africa can feed, even this country alone, Uganda alone, can feed the whole world for at least 5 years. Can you imagine? But because we do not understand the power of unity in diversity, that vision that says we are one family under God, that regardless of our gender or political parties, our religious, you know, we are one family.
Yes.
The moment an African person or even the whole world realize that we are somehow connected and we share common heritage, because we all come from God and we all go back to God, means that, oh my brother, oh my sister, we actually have one heritage. You die without any, you actually go with nothing when you are put in the kaburi. So the moment people realize that, hey, we were brought here to enjoy our peace, our unity. We are here to enjoy what God has given us. And you, the corrupt man, the woman who's stealing, you will not enjoy. Actually, when you die, what you have stolen, unfortunately, they sell it at half price. So,
this could be stolen back. Well,
so, unless you have the collective security of all of us, Ubuntu, that your success depends depends on my good relationship with you, and vice versa. So you cannot succeed alone, you can't live alone. Even if you smile while others are hungry and they are annoyed, you will not even get ulcers. So somehow we need to conceptualize these ideas and say we need to invest in social cohesion. We need to invest in character development of our young people, so that they understand the concept of living for the sake of others. Dream big. You know, our African people must be given opportunity to think big, to dream big. And teamwork, Pan-Africanism, patriotism, so that we protect the environment. So I thank UBC management and the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance. I thank our leaders, the Global Peace Foundation, but also importantly, our president, the African presidents, the East African community, the African Union. Please, let's work together and respond to the disaster humanitarian response in Sudan. They want water. Can Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda respond by taking water there? Food, fruits, medicine. Please, this is in our house, in our yard. They call it yard.
Yes.
In our yard.
The layman's language.
Americans
compound.
Should not come. You said when we are here. Enough is enough.
Melton, thank you so much for stopping by and you know, spreading that sort of information. And Melton over here is a global peace ambassador. Very important for you to note. Well, we'll leave it at that, but Ruben Pima Chivirango is coming through with sports updates, and of course we still have quite some amazing programming. Keep watching UBC TV. Have a wonderful Tuesday. My name is Philomena Masco. Good morning, Uganda.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala. This is Good Morning Uganda. This is Good Morning Uganda.
Irisiti, tompa bidara, irisiti, oja kumpa, irisiti, tompa bidara, irisiti, oja kumpa, irisiti, tompa